And an update for you on a federal judge considering whether to toss out our state's redrawn legislative district maps, a decision that several state lawmakers and candidates for office could be impacted by ahead of this year's elections and the August primary, which is just right around the corner. You may recall a couple of weeks ago, a case out of Louisiana was ruled upon by the U.S. Supreme Court, and they basically said that Louisiana had racially gerrymandered some of their districts and that was not okay. And so this was basically throwing out some aspects of the Voting Rights Act. This impacts Washington. And even though Washington often doesn't get much of the national attention that we maybe deserve, our state was the first to have this issue. It was back after the 2020 census. And then in 2021, the Redistricting Commission kind of crafted some new, based on, updated population data, crafted new district boundaries. Everybody agreed upon that. Well, then there was a push by some Democrats, and they sent it to a federal district judge, U.S. District Judge Richard Lasnik, who then basically redrew the maps and said, no, we need to make sure that the Hispanic populations, especially in Yakima County, are thoroughly represented as a voting body. And so it threw everything into chaos. It pushed some lawmakers out of the districts that they're currently in. Well, now, given this Supreme Court ruling, we're waiting to find out if, in fact, this same judge, Lasnik, is going to come back and say, yeah, based on what the high court says, need to revert back to how we were in 2024 before the new maps were drawn up. And this affects a heck of a lot of lawmakers. So you've got Republicans that are pushing him to revert to the old maps. And then you've got the Secretary of State weighing in legal filings, basically saying, don't do this. This is crazy timing. We've got the primaries coming. You're going to throw everybody into chaos. This is part of his discussion, or what his pleading, I should say, with the court not to do it. He said, this is again Secretary of State Steve Hobbs. He said, this court should not take any action that would affect the use of the existing legislative district maps for 2026 elections. These maps are currently in use. Election officials and hundreds of candidates for the Washington state legislature have relied on those existing legislative districts. Now, meantime, you have Republican Senator Nikki Torres, who was basically drawn out of the boundaries and is in the process of moving to the Tri Cities so that she would no longer be serving the 15th. She'd be running in the 8th legislative district as a result of this redistricting. But now you've got this decision that could put her back into her district and she may not have to move. There is so much in flux. And, she talked to us a couple of weeks ago after this Supreme Court decision and said, I was redistricted out. This has had a huge impact on her and her constituents. And ironically, she's Hispanic. And she was redistricted out because basically some folks on the Democratic side said being a Republican made her not truly a representative of her Hispanic constituents. Of course, she takes great issue with that, especially given the fact that we only have a matter of weeks here. There is hope that a decision will come before month's end. And so Senator Torres sent me a comment this morning when I reached back out and said, we expect this ruling any day. She believes, and she pushed back on Hobbs, saying, don't throw the state into chaos. This is what she told me. She said there would still be enough time for SOS, the Secretary of State, to make changes and mail out ballots by July 16 in time for the primary. The primary does not have to be pushed back, especially if the ruling is made before the end of the month. It really shouldn't be that difficult for SOS to revert the maps. Again, it would just be going back to the maps that we had 2 years ago. And I reached out as well to GOP Chair Representative Jim Walsh of Aberdeen. He thinks there's also going to be plenty of time to revert back to the old maps, and he expects a decision any day out of Judge Lasnik's court. So this is a fairly big deal. One of the things I wanted to mention, this affects so many candidates. Who, remember, last week was the filing week for candidates running for office. And according to Washington's elections director, Stuart Holmes, I'm going to read this because it was out of the court filing. I don't want to get it wrong. He said that of the 294 people who filed last week to run for a legislative office across Washington state, 67 are seeking seats in one of the affected districts. So this impacts a whole lot of people who need to know if they're running in the new district or they're running in the old district, or do they have to relocate? This is a crazy period of time, but really important to get a decision here. And it sounds like it may be coming very soon. So thanks for tuning in. That's it for today's episode of Washington in Focus Daily for this Thursday, May the 14th. Thank you for watching. I hope you'll join us again tomorrow.